Hello, everyone. So now I'm just going to do a little brief, tiny thing on the Crimean War. Not very long, just kind of a basic overview of it. If you want something deeper, obviously you want to go somewhere else, but I'm going to give you just kind of the short of the impact and basics of how the war worked. Okay, so full disclosure, not particularly long video here. Okay, so the Crimean War takes place in the Crimea, and the Crimea is a peninsula right here, as I circle it, in the Black Sea. Most notably, Sevastopol is probably the big city. Yalta, we had a World War II conference there. Now, if we flash back, so during the 1850s, Russia controls the Ukraine here. That's modern day Moldova. That's areas over here, Wallachia. And then down here, we would have had not Turkey, but the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so just so we know where we're at. Now, the road to this war, the Ottomans had been in a period of decline for a number of years, losing most of its territory in Europe throughout the 17 and 1800s. And they had been butting heads with Russia for years over control of the Black Sea. I mean, the Black Sea's huge for trade. It's a warm water port. Like it's an important area to control. And in 1853, this is all going to kind of come to a head. Now, the Russians claim the right to protect Christian shrines in Palestine, places like Bethlehem and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that they need to get down there and control those sites. Now, side note, that right to control those areas, those holy areas, had already been given to France. So keep that in mind for a couple minutes from now. Now, the Russians would also then move into Ottoman territory of modern-day Moldova, as well as the province of Wallachia. And so they're invading Ottoman territory. Now, initially, the Ottomans aren't real hip to a war. They don't think they're really equipped for a war. And initially, they try to negotiate, but it doesn't work well, and thus war will happen. But something interesting happens a year into the war. In 1854, a shakeup occurs, and France and Britain will decide to come into the war on the side of the Ottomans. And this is huge. Because it gives the Ottomans a much needed boost. You see some of the encampment here. I believe this is a Russian area. And the reason why Britain and France are coming into this area is that if Russia beats the Ottomans, okay, if Russia beats the Ottomans, that's going to give them control not only of all of the Black Sea, but much of the Eastern Mediterranean. And that's going to give them a huge economic boost that the British and French, do not want the Ottomans to have. Now, the French also were still harboring some issues from the Congress of Vienna and issues they had with Russia there, and they didn't like the whole idea that Russia was trying to encroach upon their turf in Bethlehem and Jerusalem and stuff like that. Now, the Russians, seeing this, now are like, all right, well, we have to try to get an ally as well. So they try to get the Austrians to come in on their side, and the Austrians were like, yeah, no. So they will not allow that to happen, and that's going to be interesting because it's going to mess the Austrians up a little bit later on. Now, fighting this war, I'm not going to go into all the battles, guys. It's crazy. I have here lots of mistakes because you have this like combination of like some guns and cannon and people still using like cavalry. Probably the most famous, and I'll show you a picture later, is the Battle of Balaclava, in which the British Light Brigade, their light cavalry brigade, goes charging into a valley to attack the Russians, who are up on the heights of basically huge hills, and they get to it's bizarre. It's like they charge down into a valley and allow someone from above to basically light them up like crazy. And they are obliterated. Now, for the British, it really helps out morale, and lots of people go to fight and blah, blah, blah. We'll get to it later, but, you know, it wasn't pretty. The biggest thing about this war that you need to know is the devastation of disease. Now, there will be a change in the future because of this. We're going to look at a couple other videos addressing that, mainly because of two women, Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole. But because disease kills so many people in this war, and the deaths as a result of it, there were 250,000 people killed, but most people that died as a result of some type of disease. Battlefield medicine and sanitary practices will be revolutionized, mostly by Florence Nightingale, but then some other things by a woman, Mary Seacole. Again, we'll be watching videos about them. That will change, but it was devastating. The war itself was grinding because it was lots of like sieges and very little flow back and forth. It was like a 2-year stalemate in a lot of areas. It was just terrible. But in 1855, the big moment comes when the key city of Sevastopol is taken by the British, the Ottomans, and the French. And then shortly after that, Tsar Nicholas I, who was prosecuting this war of Russia, dies, and his son decides, okay, enough is enough, and we need to end the war. And here are just some pictures to give you an idea. Here's the Light Brigade, this famous painting, and there's a poem about it, about them charging into it. Again, it's one of the words. It's right up there with like Pickett's Charge for those of you, you know, for your little Civil War tie-in. Like, let's run across this mile of open ground, and it's just a bad idea, like every day of the week. And then here is a painting of the siege of Sevastopol. As you can see, lots of cannon, and this is coming from the British angle. You see the British flag over there. Just brutal, brutal fighting. So in the end, the Russians are going to lose. And for the Russians, I mean, they are going to have to withdraw from those areas that they had expanded into. They're going to have to give up a port on the Danube River to the Ottomans. The Black Sea was now a neutral site. And as I mentioned before, they have to get out of Moldova and Wallachia. So anything that they kind of gained early in this war, they lose everything plus some now that the Black Sea is basically open to everyone. And Russia, they just don't look good as a result of this war. Now, the impacts of the war are pretty huge. One are going to be issues between Russia and Austria, which long-term will have impacts when we get to World War I. The Russians, of course, not fond of the Austrians because they felt like they could have helped them out. The Russians will also withdraw kind of from European affairs for a while, miss out on some things, kind of put themselves back a little bit. The French will take a heavy blow to their finances from this and will have them in some rough shape economically, which, as I mentioned in a previous video, which will eventually get back to them when they go to war against the Germans. And so the French really don't come out of this as a victor. I mean, they win the war, but it really hurts them more in the long time. And the Austrians are kind of left on an island by themselves, which will leave them open to eventual German expansion with the Austro-Prussian War, which I'll talk about later. And so all in all, when you look at the Crimean War, aside from the British, who actually make out pretty good here, and the Ottomans that get to hold on to where they're at, it was a pretty brutal war, and nothing like stupendously gained, really, for either side. And in the end, there's some alliance issues that will crop up later. And that's about it. So make sure to kind of pay attention to what we're talking about. Again, as I said, this is just a basic overview of this war. Feel free to look at some other videos to get a lot of more in-depth stuff. And as far as my classes are concerned, we'll get into some interesting women who had a tremendous impact on this war and in a lot of things in some subsequent videos, okay? All right, guys, take care, and I'll see you soon.